Welcome again to some more potent ponderings. I'm Dillon Hill,
I'm Jeremy Little.
and today Jeremy's going to be taking it away with talking about some stuff connected to the last time we were discussing the Tower of Babel and the dispersion of the nations. So we're going to look at that a little more closely in terms of the dispersion aspects, and Jeremy's going to kind of take point on this and kind of lead us through some of that, and then we'll kind of jump in and discuss it. So go for
I,
it,
I
man.
do have a question you said Babel. I
Yes.
mean, where does that come from, the Babel? Is it like blah, blah, blah? Does it really?
Well, the Hebrew word for confusion is actually balal, and so for some reason the wordplay is Babel in the Hebrew
Okay,
naming of it. So that's where it comes from. Then
gotcha.
of course we get Babylon from the Greek translation of the term. So for whatever that's worth. So, but that's where it comes from. So
But however you slice it, we're dealing with the Tower of Babel,
yes.
and the beginnings of it, which, fascinatingly enough, in the land of Iraq to this day, they have the remains of the ziggurat of Babylon, which is located near the city of Hilla. Here's the city of Hilla, and I'll just zoom out so you can see where that location is. And of course, Herodotus writes about the ziggurat of Babylon, the Temple of Babylon, and how high it was when he actually went there. I want to say it was the ninth temple that had been built there because it
Mm.
had been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and
Yeah.
rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. Well, here we are to this day. This is what's left of it, which is kind of sad. So much great archaeology over there in Iraq, but
Yeah.
it's difficult. Saddam Hussein was trying to turn this whole complex. Here's some of the remains. But
Mm-hmm.
Saddam was trying to turn this whole complex into like a vacation place where people could go and spend exorbitant amount of money to look at the ruins of Babylon.
Yeah.
And instead, it's a wreck over there,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But the fascinating thing is that when we read in Genesis 11, when we talk about it, from here the nations were dispersed. Before we get into all that dispersal, Dylan, I was curious to know what your thoughts were, and I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, yay, fun.
What are your thoughts on the possibility? We talked before about how the Ark. Now, if you look at the history of it, the
Right.
ancient historians, it was somewhere around Lake Van as opposed to Mount Ararat, which is there. It
Yeah.
was somewhere around Lake Van in the mountains of Urartu, which would be here, and there's nothing left of it. What are the chances? Did everybody follow everyone that went down to Babel?
Mm-hmm.
Did they, or did some of them maybe depart from there?
That's a good question.
Ooh.
Um,
And what evidence do you have one way or the other?
yeah, that's a great question. Ha, yeah,
Ha!
maybe yeah, you may have got me on that one. You know
Gotcha.
that yeah. Well, I think and I think you'd have to look at both um the biblical account. I think some of the text that Josephus even writes about. Let me get to my text here. Man, that's a great question.
Well, in Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, it does talk about that they were dispersed abroad, but it talks about uh, the initial reticence that they had to come down from the mountains of Urartu
Yeah,
for fear of the flood.
right.
And he does say that they all went together, but I'm just curious, like, what are the chances that some did not? And I don't think that we can necessarily answer that.
Not necessarily. I mean, the biblical account just gives us now the whole earth or the whole land had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. So, and I think we talked about this last time. It's likely that they came down the Tigris River because then they'd be coming from the east to settle where they did in the plain of Shinar. But Benihana. Um, for all your Japanese food needs. Um, But and
Yes, please.
yeah, that up a little bit. Um, so yeah, the when it talks about now the whole earth, the problem is that immediately with the way that that term is being used there is that it's not actually talking about the whole land, it's talking about people. And so it's using a figure of speech to represent a group of people.
So like
So
Eretz or Eretz.
well, like Eretz means either earth or land, but in this case, you're using it in a figure of speech to say not literally the land itself, but the people who dwell in it. So it's sort of a
It's
removed figure of speech for it.
here's the Greek. It's
Yeah,
gay.
yeah. And in the Greek, it does the same thing. It means either land or earth. I tend to be very conservative when I translate either one of those terms. My default is to go to land rather than earth, unless there's a good reason to translate it as earth. But I think in this particular text, it the idea has more to do with the whole of the people inhabiting the land or the earth at that point.
Real quick, Dylan, look at
Yeah.
what they have here.
Yes.
It's gamma eta and then
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah. That's weird.
gamma epsilon.
Yeah.
Gamma
They
eta
would
up
mean the same
here.
thing.
That's not the same word.
No.
Nicely done.
Wow. Yeah. That shouldn't be that way. Yeah. Gamma epsilon, like you have there at the G1065. That just means like also.
Oh wait, no way.
So,
Oh,
gamma
it'd be a long way
eta.
to get to eta.
Oh, hey, you got a long way to go.
Oh, hey,
Yeah, no,
pull
that
out
is
my B
wrong.
dag.
Yeah, there you go. Get your B dag out. Yeah,
Just
no,
saying it.
that's wrong. Ga with gamma epsilon that you just saw there. That one is just means also.
Look,
Uh,
we are in no way saying anything wrong against eSword, the free Bible software,
oh yeah, I'm not going to complain with people who put all this stuff together. It's a lot of work, but
who is our unofficial sponsor.
there you go. But accidents do happen. That's just a reality of doing this kind of work. It's a lot of text to work with. So
Yeah.
hats off to
Okay.
them.
Well, I'll get it off there.
Anyway,
So
so anyway, but yeah, they're obviously using it for a figure of speech for the inhabitants of the land, not literally the land itself. Um, so yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I have a great answer for it.
yeah,
My inclination would be that since you likely had a very small population in those mountains at that time, because they weren't
yeah.
going to come back down, that the likelihood of any of them dispersing off to the east or the west from those mountains, I find unlikely. I would imagine they'd all collectively come down from the mountains, but I don't know that you could say one way or the other. So,
Okay.
but yeah,
So we can't be overly dogmatic in
yeah,
saying that
no,
every single last person came from there.
yeah,
But this is the general vicinity. I guess the other question would be, as this is ancient Babylon, as best as they can tell, and this is the remains of the ziggurat of Babylon, which is presumably built on the same location that the first one, which would be the top, well, the first post-flood one.
yeah,
Was it ever here? Was there a land of Shinar pre-flood? Never mind.
yeah. Now you're really having fun with the speculation.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we can be careful and say in this general vicinity of Hilah, this is Hilah. If I turn the labels on, you can see it's Hilah. I
yeah,
like having the labels off because there's too much stuff.
yeah. There is.
So it's somewhere around Hilah, north of Hilah, is Babylon.
Right.
But the fascinating thing is, if you go back to Genesis 10, Genesis 11 does give us verse 9. Therefore, its name was called Babel or Babel,
Yeah.
because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth.
Yeah.
So from there, the Lord scattered them, and them would be the people that were there, right?
Right.
Presumably, if it's everybody, but if not, we're not going to obsess about. Are you going to lose any sleep over that, Dillon?
Probably not.
I mean, probably not.
Yeah.
unless you're sitting there up at night thinking
I
about it,
mean, for
working
crying
through
out loud, if I haven't lost any sleep over the course of the last 40 years, then surely not now.
it. Yeah, you
So,
got it. So, but the point is, from this location and the horrible shock they're all in, where at 1 second we're speaking the same language, the next second we're not, and we're gonna leave. We know because of Nimrod, the rebel, we know that we're in rebellion against God, and God has brought a soft judgment. I would call it a soft judgment, which is really an act of grace
yeah,
to get them to move. And then, of course, as Josephus records, them trying to make this tower waterproof in
mm,
case God has a mind to flood the earth again, and they can all ascend the tower and assault heaven.
yeah,
Good thought there, buddy.
yeah,
But the people that leave are freaking out, and they're some of them are opportunists. Some of the everybody has their own thought process. They've seen what was modeled to them through Nimrod and what could be accomplished through his tyrannical government, right?
hmm,
But as they go from this place, their options are not many, right?
yeah,
So this is the land of Shinar. You know, a lot of people think of Iraq. They think, oh, it's Iraq. What a wonderful place to live. You know, I could live
yeah,
here. There's a couple of plants. I'm gonna have a good time. But it really has this fertile land in between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates.
yeah.
And this is it's really a beautiful land. And even where we were just looking here in north of Hilla, we can see channels are cut to water the land. And this is and Dillon, here's a question for you. What's solid brown? Is that sand?
Oh man, I don't know.
It, it's wheat.
Okay, so wheat.
So they'll have a lot of wheat fields, a lot of different types of crops, and they'll grow different crops. I mean, you could look at some
Yeah,
of these pictures and say, well, it could be farmland in America. It is fertile area, but the people that leave there are limited in the choices that they have because if you do start to go west or east, west, you're going to hit what?
oh, you had they call it the anvil of God.
The anvil of God, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not going to make it now. Check this out. Look what they're doing over here
Oh, that's fascinating.
out of the desert. Of course, it wasn't there back in the day.
Sure. Yeah.
But you're going to hit the anvil of God over here in the desert, and then what are
Yeah.
they going to hit over here as they head
I
towards?
got all the Zagros Mountains.
Yeah, you're going to hit all the mountains, and these mountains. For those that don't know, the Iranian landscape. I mean, it's mountainous.
Yeah.
You know, you got nice places where you can have some valleys with some farmland and stuff, but it is kind of treacherous to deal, especially back then with the technological limitations that these people had in order to get around from point A to point B or even to point Z. So
Yeah.
you could try and say, you know what, maybe we'll remain friendly with Nimrod and we'll stay in the land as some of them did. And of course, Nimrod built multiple cities in Shinar and
Right.
Sumer. And but still you're if you went south, then you're gonna run into the Persian Gulf, or you're gonna maybe you could go along the shore like Charlton Heston did at the end of Planet of the Apes.
Ah.
And then they run into this cool structure and build a town. Look at this. And they got some cool stuff over there. Are those houses? Anyway, but you're kind of limited and you may run into some treacherous difficult areas to pass. So if you don't stick around in Shinar, you really only have two options to go north: the Euphrates or the Tigris.
Right.
And once you start up that path, you're stuck, because if you try to go west or if you try to go east in between either of them, you're going to hit desert,
Right.
and it's not going to end out too well for you. You're going to die of thirst, die of hunger, heat exhaustion, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But the fun thing is, as people proceed, and it's not bad proceeding along it. I mean, I'm gonna use the term hunter gatherers. Okay,
Yeah.
when you're sitting in Babylon, you can do farming, you can do animal husbandry, you can even do animal husbandry on the run. You can be shepherds.
Sure.
But the problem is how many people are leaving this land.
Yeah.
So if somebody were to come upon and say, hey, I like this land, we shall call this land. And then as Wash said in Firefly, how about we call it your grave? So you've always got the people coming behind you who are like, yeah, we like this land too. And then we're here, and then they get pushed away, and then these people get pushed away, and then the next people get pushed away, and it's this
Yeah.
never-ending pushing. And so trying to settle along the Tigris and Euphrates is difficult.
Yeah.
It's just like your options. And then you can come to a turning point and follow a tributary and see where that leads you.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll lead you somewhere. So, but the fascinating thing is that as these people move, you have the majority of the people are moving, right?
Probably. Yeah.
So the Nimrod has the first mover advantage, and that's why it says in Genesis 10. Actually, we should go to Genesis 10.
Yeah.
See if I can hit enter on that. It says the beginning of Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel.
Right.
And Uruk, or Erech, Akkad, and Kalna in the land of Shinar. Now, he gets to stay where he's at, and he consolidates power in Shinar, and then he moves north into Assyria, as it says here. From that land he went forth into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth Ir, and Kala, and Rezin between Nineveh and Kala. That is the great city.
Right.
So he's got a first mover advantage that he can actually have the first empire of Shinar and Assyria.
Which, now, I will say one thing that's probably worth saying again that we mentioned last time is that chronologically speaking, chapter 10 is actually happening after chapter 11. 11 is a review of how the state of things came to be in chapter 10. And so 10 gives you the conclusion of what happened. 11 gives you the explanation of the details of what actually happened. So with that said, and I don't know that I've ever looked at it this way, but would you say that whenever it starts talking about him beginning to build these cities, those cities are all post Tower of Babel constructions and foundations? Those aren't things that are happening before the tower itself.
Yeah, I'd say because it says the beginning of his kingdom was Babel.
Yeah.
Babel's listed first.
Yeah.
Presumably created first, and that's where they were in chapter 11.
Yeah.
And that's the historical account, not the biblical account, but the full historical account that we get from Josephus, who's looking at pagan writers and the like.
Yeah.
As well as Hebrew. So yeah, I'd say that's definitely it. I mean, this seems chronological.
Yeah.
So he consolidates power in the land of Shinar.
Right.
And from that land, he went forth into Assyria. And so that's how it happened, which we find out in this table of nations, it is split up between the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Right.
Their sons and their sons and their sons and their sons. And chapter 10 is set up nicely where it's got all of them together here. And then it's got the section on the sons of Japheth, their names.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the sons of Ham and their names in this next section. So from verses 6 to 20, and then Shem and his sons to verse 31. And then what a nice little hey, in terms of the making of the chapters, who set up the chapters, this one was done pretty well, because it's got the bookends. These are the families of Noah, according to their genealogies, by their nations, and out of these, the nations were separated on the earth after the flood.
Right.
So we've got that. Now, Dillon, here's a fascinating thing.
Mm-hmm.
As you look at genealogies of it just take Genesis as an ancient source, history. Sure. This isn't supposed to be taken as allegory. Oh, what does Japheth really mean? What is he trying to talk about? The dinosaur? Come on.
Yeah.
No, this is literal kind of stuff to be taken literally. But it's not dealing with the Israelites. Now we do get here Shem in verse 21, Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, which is Heber, the Hebrews, because Heber was the one during the Tower of Babel. So he went in a certain direction. And so, but he's the father of all the children. So, but the focus of this chapter is not on the background of, or not just on the background of the Hebrews. It's
Right.
on the background of everybody:
Right.
the Hamites, the Japhethites, and the Semites or the Shemites. It's fantastic. Now, other ancient histories, I don't know if you've read them. Have you seen them put in everybody else's genealogy?
Not that I can specifically remember.
Me neither, and it's not a critique on them or
No.
criticism, because it could be that they do have something like that. A lot of the times, what they write, you looked at the Sumerian kings list, they're not interested. I mean, that's the purpose of it, is these are the kings of Sumer.
Right. Well, either
Or
that or, you've got your genealogies for your most important main characters in order to make a
right,
point as to there's a sense of, even if they're not kings of sorts, there's still a sense of establishing their nobility and the heritage that these people come from in order to establish sort of the character of that person for the context of the story. So,
and what a boring chapter this is. Let me just read the first few verses, starting in verse 2. The sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshach and Tiras. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz and Riphath and Togarma. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these, the coastlands of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. Let us pause and meditate on this.
yeah.
This. So when I taught Bible at Houston or at Northland Christian years ago, it had dawned on me that the Bible, the Word of God, is like different places on earth, geographical locations. And in some places, there's a desert. And in order to really get anything out of that desert, you have to drill.
Yeah.
And as I was formerly in ConocoPhillips, I think about the production of oil and natural gas, and certainly Saudi Arabia, where once was desert, is woo baby. That cool little thing that we saw earlier,
Yeah.
that location that we were looking along here, that they've got all sorts of fancy stuff built on oil. I don't know about that one in particular,
Yeah.
but there are definitely cities that are, this nation's wealth is built on oil. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't some cool things in Saudi Arabia. Certainly, as you dig down in some of these southern parts, you'll find there is green, and you will find, what is that, Dillon?
It looks like terrace farming.
You bet it. You bet it. You better believe it. Yeah, terrace farming. But that's not their wealth. They're not like, hey, let's export our goods here. So not all
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is a desert. But in looking at the desert, you got to dig deep. And I think this chapter 10 is the same way. It's one of these dig deep kind of things, because while these names don't have much meaning by themselves, if you look at them in this context of what they are, or geographically speaking, these are people's names, but they're also locations of places.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing that, boy, I got so excited when I was first reading, when I started reading years ago, of course, Antiquities of the Jews. By the time I got to book one, chapter 6, I thought, the first few chapters are pretty quick read. By the time I got to chapter 6, this guy did us a great favor,
Mm-hmm.
because he took these names and he gave us the Greeks, what the Greeks call them, because you know what the Greeks like to do? They're going to name the people after something that they like,
Yeah.
and not necessarily what the people name themselves. I mean, we never do that here in America, do we? Name people something other than what they call themselves.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
I mean, take for example Germany.
Yeah.
What do they
Exactly.
what do they call themselves?
Well, I don't know what they call themselves specifically, but I know they call their location Deutschland.
Deutschland, right? Exactly, Deutschland. And so, as they refer to themselves in that way, we go along with the. Where does Germany come from?
I'm going to assume that's a Latin derivative.
Yeah, of course.
Germania.
Germania. Yeah.
Yeah.
Germania.
Yeah, there you go. Start hunting.
So the interesting thing is, you can look at all of these names as I did, and I did it for the Japhethites, right?
Yeah.
You've got Japheth. I've got the Greek name. I have what Josephus had to say. I have what others had to say. And you can do this for each of these places. And you find that as you look on the map, these names will still be in places like Magog is really Ma being the land of Gog. And do you know where the land of Gog is?
I do not specifically. You obviously hear all.
Well, shame on
I mean,
you.
to the
It's
north, I know,
Georgia.
but like
It's
specifically, no. Okay, it's kind of
Georgia.
Caucasus.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, funny you should say that Caucasus, because I found in here. Look at this. The Caucasus is yet another term of Gog.
Yeah.
Gog Hassan, which is the stronghold of God.
Mm.
Caucasan. Caucasan.
Yeah.
So now I've also was consulting the PhD anthropologist Arthur Custance, who literally claimed himself to have a PhD in anthropology, who his website says that he had I'm sorry, PhD in anthropology. But unfortunately, the Wikipedia page says he didn't. It said
Mm.
that Christians are lying about it. I don't know why they care what a Christian has to say about. It's more important what the man has to say about himself. So why is it that that Wikipedia says that he doesn't have a PhD, and yet the man himself claimed to have a PhD in anthropology? Who should we trust, Dillon?
Well, generally, you're going to trust the source of the experience, not necessarily somebody else's,
Yeah,
along with a Wikipedia article.
yeah.
But
So, hey, all due respect to people that write Wikipedia
absolutely,
articles, but I've found too many mistakes in them.
yeah,
It's a nice place to go, but it's not perfect.
yeah,
So, but
absolutely.
in consulting his work, and he did extensive work on this, and he's looking at what the Assyrians called people and all that. It's really fun to look at that, and I would encourage anybody to go and take the time. It's just fun to do it. You find out more of a story of these names and these places. Like, where do your people come from, Dillon, on this list?
So, if I remember correctly, and there's going to be some controversy with that for my particular people. So, being a Scandinavian people, supposedly that it goes Gomer Ashkenaz, um, but it also depends a little bit upon some of that back history, because there is some of the medieval Scandinavian historians actually trace some of the Scandinavian peoples back to refugees who fled from Troy after the fall of Troy.
That's fine.
Um, so that's why you probably get some of that mention there of links to Turkey and so forth. So,
Oh
um,
yeah, and that
yeah,
fits right in with what we're talking about.
yeah,
Because here's the deal: the people that go up the Euphrates or the Tigris, they're going to be funneled right into this land of Turkey,
mm,
modern day Turkey. And that's exactly what we see. In fact, the way Josephus puts it is that the Japhethites live from this region here all the way into Europe
right,
to Cadiz, which is over here,
yeah,
is Cadiz, which is Tarshish
mm-hmm,
of the ancient world, as the people of Spain still claim, no, that's Tarshish. And that's actually one of the names as well. But here's the deal: this is a major place, a stopping point for a lot of people.
right,
So you've got all the European stock that come here and come to this area, and just look at what happens. I mean, this is a beautiful place. Talk about defensible. You're
yeah,
surrounded by mountains here, and you have this great plain. And if a tribe could come here and hold this land, it'd be great. But always there's somebody coming in behind to displace you. And so that's exactly what we see, and that's where we get a lot of these names. That's why Georgia, still we call it Georgia, Bigorga, is still the land of Gog here,
yeah,
Gorga, and Tubal is still Tbilisi is one of the main cities up here as well.
mm,
So and Meshech, which we also get, Meshech was fascinating, the Moskani, as well as the Muscovites, Moscow.
Right.
Moscow itself still bears that name. So you think of Moscow, which is somewhere, it's over here, yonder.
Yeah, my Russian geography is not good.
I know it's over here somewhere.
Yeah,
So, I don't have labels on just so we can see the geography of it.
sure.
But I mean, think about the people that came here to live in this land. They've got protection in the north by the Caucasus and mountains on the north and south. And they have a nice defensible area here where they can set up the beacons of Minas Tirith
There you
and
go.
call on Rohan for help.
There you go.
Rohan. So basically, what happens though is that Turkey becomes a way station where people live for so long and eventually get pushed out. But what happens down here? Nimrod has a first mover advantage, and fewer people went south. The people of Canaan who came from Ham went south. The people of Mitzra, who came from Ham, also went south, and they landed upon Egypt. And
Right.
this is one of the greatest places on earth to come to. Look at the defenses.
Yeah.
You got desert. You got the Nile feeding it. The Nile breaks off into, look at this beautiful land. People think when they think of Egypt, right? You think about the political map and then you think, oh, here's Egypt. What a great place to live. I
Yeah.
would just look at all the cities, look at all the people.
Yeah.
I mean, what is this, the moon? Look, there's tracks here. What are they doing there? They're dragging people. They're dragging them out into the desert, and you'll
Uh,
never hear from them again. But it's not a nice place, except for it's a great place. You
mm-hmm.
got the Mediterranean in the north. You got the Red Sea on the east, as well as the desert, and of course, as David Roll pointed out, the geography of this land was a lot different. It was a lot harder to get into Egypt because the water came down further, and there was the lake over here. The Yam Suf was over here. It was much bigger, and there was one over here, and it was hard to get into this land. So it's highly defensible. So Egypt has a first mover advantage, and then you have those of Foot, who are the Libyans, who also came upon their land, which a lot of people think of Libya as, this is like the Nevada desert where people go to
Yeah.
die. Libya's got some nice green places. I mean, I bet it's beautiful country up here. But they also have a good defense because they've got desert. And then
Mm-hmm.
as people move along, the Moors move along, you get to Carthage
Right.
and Morocco and all that kind of business. The people of Kush came down here to the S curve, and this is the S curve of the Nile River, of course. And as people moved, and so it's safer for them. They have a safer time than the people in Turkey who have to stay or try and stay and fight and get pushed around by the massive amounts of people that are going.
Yeah.
Egypt is not easily assailed.
Right.
Canaan, of course, we know is split up between the hill country and the valleys.
Right.
And of course, the Jezreel Valley, the beautiful Jezreel Valley in the north, which has mountains near it as well. And so it's got defensible qualities. But the thing is that you had people that had first mover advantages, like the Sumerians, like the Assyrians really were taken over, and then the Egyptians, and even the Canaanites. The problem is that the Canaanites were not united with each other. They were a confederacy. And so when we see in Genesis 14, when they come to get attacked, they're taken out one at a time, which I believe we already talked about.
Right.
They're taken out one at a time, and it's always better them than us until it becomes you.
Yeah, exactly.
And then as people do move into Persia, you've got the Medes who come from Japheth that are here in the north and stay upon the Caspian Sea, southern Caspian Sea, and also into the mountains of Iran. You have the Elamites who are coming from Shem, who come here and live in the mountains, and then some of the more fertile areas of Iran. And then you have those who make their way all the way to the Indus River and the Indians themselves. Now, the fascinating thing is it takes them longer. So they're actually going to be behind the people over here because it takes them longer to get here. But
Yeah.
then they have great protection in their nation because they got the Himalayas in the the north,
Hmm.
and they're surrounded by mountains, mountains of Iran or Pakistan,
Yeah.
and then they've got this area where, physically speaking, they look very similar.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my wife is Indian. Her family comes from the south. They're darker in the south, lighter in the north, but they're pretty protected.
Yeah.
The Asians that came over here also by geography. And this separation allows them a fair amount of protection, except for fighting against each other. A fair amount of protection. The same thing happens in Asia, a fair
Right.
amount of protection, but also isolation. So the physical characteristics of Indian, very similar. The physical characteristics of these East Asians is also very similar. They have the epicanthic fold of the eye, which is a dominant trait that is in one of their ancestors had it, and it just passed on, baby. And they were not really mixing
Yeah.
with all these other people,
Well,
but
it's
they were,
actually, I was going to
yeah,
say, it's actually really interesting that you mentioned that the folks in the north of India are a lighter skin tone because, initially, if you go over to the Indus Valley here, um, you get the Harappan civilization that pops up kind of first after, the first groups of people that move into this region with Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And they're there till about 1500 BC. And then you get the invasion from the west of the Aryan peoples who settled there and
yes,
along the base of the Himalayas. So you're getting an influx of mixed peoples coming in from the west, who are settling there along the north of well, I guess technically it's on the south of the Himalayas over into the Ganges River Valley.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting that you mentioned that. But yeah, the Harappans, they're isolated for, you know, goodness, almost 1,000 years before
yeah,
the Aryans move in and start taking over. So yeah, and then of course you got the Thar Desert there just to the east of the Indus Valley, which provides protection as well. So
yes, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Of
so
course, modern techniques are helping.
sure, yeah, absolutely.
Modern irrigation,
Yeah,
it works. So, but the fascinating thing is that you'll have Japhethites who occupy much of Europe, and
right.
once they're more and more kicked out of Turkey, they move along to Greece, of course, Italy, and Spain. And as you read about those Genesis 10 peoples and the names, you do the study, and especially it really helps to look to see what all Josephus had to say about it and their names, and even looking at the Septuagint to get more of the Greek name.
Yeah,
You find that there's alternate ways of saying things, and the way names change over time. And one of my favorite examples, you know, it may not sound exactly like Moscow, doesn't sound like Meshach,
yeah,
except it does. Moskva. After a while, it changes, and I'll point to this example right here. Everybody knows, or has at least heard of, maybe they don't know who he is, Alexander the Great.
right.
Alexander. Well, the Arabs call him Iskandar, so
Yeah,
they flip the X to be a sk instead of a
yeah,
x. And so these names change over time. And in fact, there's even a lake Iznik over here, which retains the Askani. It used to be called Lake Askani, which was from your buddy Ashkenaz.
mm,
Ashkenaz. The Ashkenaz. There's astronauts and there's Ashkenaz. Which one are you? Oh.
nice.
But even the land of Ascania is the land of Scandinavia. So
Yeah,
the D works its way in there.
yeah.
Scandinavia sort of
Well,
thing.
and the thing that that often happens is when you get language differentiation, some languages don't have certain sounds in them, and when those names come from other languages that they don't have sounds for, they have to adapt it as best they can.
Right.
Um, so we talk about how in Hebrew there are certain letters that you have that they don't have in Greek. So when we're transferring from a Hebrew text into the Greek translation of the Septuagint, those names have to be shifted slightly in order to be pronounced by a Greek because they just don't have those letters and sounds in the Greek language.
Because
So
they don't have the sh
yeah, they don't have a sh
sound
sound,
in
they don't have a
Greek.
w sound. So
So it's Sumar or Sumer or Sanar.
yeah,
So, and
yeah,
that would be this land here, the land of Shinar.
yeah,
So But the fascinating thing is that the peoples over in these areas mix with one another. And so the races get more mixed in these areas, whereas others go off and they don't have as much mixing. Now you do have some mixing between the India. You have some came from sub-Saharan Africa, which sub-Saharan Africa is so difficult to populate. The dense jungles, the animal life, it's very difficult. So the geography forces them. First of all, they don't have a first mover advantage because they're not really coming from the desert initially. Initially, they're coming down the Nile and
Yeah.
into Africa. And then some areas are easier to people because of more plains type rather than in the deep jungle. So
Right.
Africa itself is difficult. But they eventually, and as people live in coastlands, they will develop boat traveling. Those who came to Mozambique, you also have African stock, sub-Saharan African stock that comes over into Indonesia as well, and they are still there to this day. As our friends the Perez's that were over there, we're flying planes to help them.
Yeah.
And then you have them mixing with some of the Indian stock to come here to be the Aborigines, who
Yeah.
were the initial inhabitants of Australia.
Yeah.
And then you have mixing with the Asian stock mixing with those as well to get the Polynesian flair. And then the Polynesians, of course, we know made it, some of them, as scientists have discovered through DNA, made it to South America.
Yeah.
Now, as people are pushed, it's fascinating. We had those the Tuckers who were missionaries to the some of the Indian tribes up in this northwest area,
Hmm.
and they have a lot of similarities with some people from Kamchatka
Yeah.
and Siberia. The Indian tribes over here, if you say Indian, thank you, Christopher Columbus, who thought that he landed
Yeah.
in India and called everybody over here Indians. But
Yeah.
we'll not worry about that. We'll just use that term because everybody knows it. So the natives have similarities. But
Right.
the deal is, if you think about from there, they were scattered across the face of the whole earth from this location, and
Yeah.
how long it took them, and how much adapting they had to do on the way to make it all the way across the Bering Strait into North America and the various places in North America, living a nomadic lifestyle, living a hunter gatherer lifestyle, and following buffalo herds and all of that, and not being used to not establishing, being used to that break down, tear down the teepees, and let's get out of here as soon as possible. We need to be able to have that flexibility because of what they've been used to.
Yeah.
It is no wonder that by the time the Europeans got here, which the Europeans did not have a first mover advantage, mind you,
Yeah.
but the Europeans did after a while, once these people were tearing each other apart with war, and then the Persians tried to pick a fight with the Greeks. Of course, we know how that turned out.
Yeah.
But the Europeans, by the time they made it over here to these people, you've got this their technology versus you got horses coming from Europe because there were no horses in North America before the Europeans came. These people don't have horses. They're not much into metallurgy. Of course, if you're living that on the go lifestyle, it's easy to chip the stones and keep going, especially if that's all you need. You don't need to develop this great technology.
Yeah.
So it's no big shock that by the time the Europeans got here, there was really no match.
Yeah.
And even to this day, as we know, the Yanomamo Indians
Yeah.
still living as hunter gatherers,
Yeah.
in, if you will, like the Stone Age, still to
Yeah.
this day. But it all originates in Babel.
Yeah. Well, and if I can maybe make a point that's more explicitly, I think you've already kind of pointed to and hinted to, is, and you notice this about cultures in general, is when they get used to a certain mode of operation, it becomes ingrained not just in the practicality of the people, it becomes ingrained in the whole thought process of the people. And so when you start thinking about nomadic peoples, that nomadic lifestyle, it becomes more than just a simple issue of what practically works for us. It actually begins to be ingrained in the very fabric of their values, the very fabric of their, in some cases, their religious perspectives. their spiritual perspectives. And so when you do get them coming into the Americas, that their culture has been predominantly move, keep moving,
Yes.
because again, you're getting forced out of places. And tragically, that continued all the way into the 1800s, 1900s with some
Tragic.
peoples, um, but that their culture is so based around that they don't, everything is around movement, and so they don't cease that nomadic lifestyle and that sort of live off the land kind of lifestyle to a great extent, because that's become kind of ingrained in their culture for so long. And then on top of that, something we talked about just before you started in, or we started in on this session, um, you talked about some of these leaders of the tribal peoples in North America who tried to unite these peoples and were unsuccessful
Yeah.
because they didn't want anything to do with it. But if you
Yeah.
think,
The Iroquois League here,
yeah, or
there
I
was
mean, you were,
multiple tribes.
yeah, and you were talking about Tecumseh trying to
Oh,
unite
yeah.
some of these peoples.
The Shawnee chief Tecumseh tried to unite the tribes. He
Yeah,
went, I mean, he went on this, he was like an ambassador going all over the
yeah,
place in the early 1800s, 1810, 1811,
yeah,
trying to get them to unite, and they just wouldn't.
yeah. But if you think about it, I mean, even
They're
to go back
used to it, like you
to,
said.
yeah, and it's not even so, because you, first of all, you got the nomadic lifestyle, you got the hunt gather, that's just what we do. But then when you think about the sort of first mover advantage that we were talking about earlier, one of the difficulties is it's not like I get here first and you're going to politely leave. It's in some cases there's all out conflict and warfare, and we've talked about this tribalism issue before, of kind of me and mine at the expense of you and yours. And if I have to kill you and yours in order to protect me and mine and supply me and mine, then that's what we're going to do. But if you think about these people where they were constantly the ones being pushed out, their mentality, the culture, the values, the spiritual perspectives, etc., it's all about protect me and mine at the expense of you and yours. And so there's still this very, I would imagine, I don't know for a fact, but I would imagine there's still this reticence to letting in the other in with me and mine, because all my people have ever known is outsider bad, insider good. And so it just gets ingrained in culture and values and religion and spirituality of these peoples. Now, don't get me wrong, we also talked about how you do get some exceptions to this. You get, the Incans, the Mayans, the Aztecs, who have some very
Yeah, the
significant,
Incas, the Mayans, and the
um,
Aztecs.
yeah. In fact, I was just listening
I mean,
to
they got their act together.
yes, they did. In fact, I was listening to just happened upon a report I was listening to on the radio the other day that as they're talking, or maybe it was on a podcast, but as we're getting these sort of ground penetrating radar technologies nowadays that are scanning these areas, they're realizing that the jungle has very much reclaimed a lot of these territories, but these were massive
Yeah.
imperial powers in these areas with seagoing. I mean, I've been to one of the locations called Tulum in I think it's in southern Mexico. Was a Mayan port city. I mean, these were cultures that had commerce going out of active ports,
Yeah.
sea trade and sea work. So I mean, these were significant cultures and societies there for sure. But they were managed to overcome to a great extent that problem of the nomadic push out survivalist kind of mentality, and were able to establish themselves. Now that all comes crashing down, between the 15, 16, 1700s, but
Yeah.
um, for a variety of reasons. But yeah, it's just interesting that you point that out, just because you do have these cultures that, all they've ever known is move, move, move to stay alive, and don't trust those on the outside. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they're still like that. There's still people like that in these
Oh,
areas.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I know.
Hey, there's still people like that in Kentucky,
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
and they come from a European stock.
Yeah.
They don't. Yeah, so living up in the hills.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating how all of that took place, and it helps to account for why they were so far behind
Yes, it
the
does. Yeah.
Europeans.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Europeans had some of the Spanish in 1492, among other things. It's when they finally reclaimed their land, the Reconquista or the
Right.
Reconquista. of their land. And they had been under Muslim rule for so long, and they finally pushed them all out. But it angered them towards all outsiders.
Yeah.
And so, when Columbus first landed in the Caribbean, somewhere in some island, was dealing with the Arawaks, he had an extremely peaceful first encounter. You can read about it in his diary. But people like Cortez comes over, and we still have his letter. He's writing to uh, John the first, who was also the fifth, or no, Charles. Sorry, not John.
Okay.
I think it one Carl. Charles the Fifth.
Yeah.
Charles the Fifth, who was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, but also
Right.
the emperor of Spain. He writes a letter back to him and says, "Man, there's gold here. These people are weak. We can kill them. We can take their gold." And the Aztecs were, hey, it's not like the Aztecs were great people. All the tribes that they'd been oppressing over there were like, "Yeah, we'll join with you, Cortez. You and your guys will join with you. We're going to kill the Aztecs. Let's kill them." And that's what they did. And Pizarro did the same thing to the Incas in South America. And
Yeah.
it's just that's the fascinating thing is it's born out of their own anger at being dominated for hundreds of years by the Muslims.
Yeah.
And
Well,
also their anger towards any non-Catholic, including the Jews
yeah.
or the Protestants.
Well, and I would even say there's always a sense in every culture, no matter how civilized it claims to be, there's always still this sense of tribalism going on. It's me and mine at the expense of you and yours. And admittedly, you do have a lot of civilizations and peoples who manage to overcome that proclivity. But the reality is that, and
like what?
well, I'm just saying you do have countries.
Theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you've got countries in the West that are willing to supply aid at the expense of their own people,
Oh, sure,
peoples of
sure.
foreign nations. So it's not that there's not an altruism that doesn't come into some nations playing out. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes that's kind of a veiled altruism that's for their own benefit, mind you. But nonetheless, there is this sense of mankind being in sin as it is. There's still this sense of me and mine at the expense of you and yours. That the other is always a threat. Those on the outside, they speak a different language. I don't know what they're saying. I don't know what they're plotting. I don't know what their culture's all about.
Google Translate's not helping.
Yeah, Google Translate's not helping. Yeah, it's there's always this sense of the other is dangerous, and
Yeah.
and even within our own country, as diverse a group of people as we have in our country, you still get that sense of cultures and differences between peoples here, where there's still that just underlying reticence of it's the other, and it makes me nervous. And I'm not necessarily talking about even racial differences or cultural differences, but sometimes socioeconomic differences, regional differences. I mean, New Yorkers, what are you going to do with New Yorkers, man? Or like you say, the people up in Appalachia, it's just different. They're other, and we don't understand them. A lot of people don't realize how vast the United States is, and when you're talking about peoples that live so far apart, and I think the same could be said for people who live in Western Russia. I mean, Western Russia versus Eastern Russia, you have very different cultures.
Oh yeah, totally different.
And I would imagine for them, there's still that sort of latent sense of you're.
I mean, even physically quite different, because they have the Asiatic look over here in the East as opposed to the Slavic stock in the West.
Yeah. And there was a lot of, and especially between the 16, 17, 1800s, there was a lot of Europeanization of Russia during that time in the western parts of Russia, on the western parts of the Ural Mountains. But yeah, so it's sort of this, again, it's just sort of this sense, I think it's interesting, of just this sinful concept that's just born out in their, not only in I think just this sinfulness in man, but also born out in the experiences of man for millennia now, of having to deal with the other that is dangerous, the other that's pushed me out, the other that's trying to take from me, and so forth. So but yeah, but I think you make a really interesting point in terms of, especially with regard to how long it takes them to develop, because I mean, once you plop down, you can start just having at it with technological development, with urban development, with civilization in general, with writing and record keeping and so on and so forth. And it just
Yeah.
changes a culture dramatically once you get to that point. So,
Yep. When you can stay, claim your territory,
yeah.
start farming, start working on architecture
Yeah.
and type of government. What works the best?
Yeah.
Philosophy, as they love
Oh,
here, like in Athens.
they absolutely do.
Well, back in the day, I don't know
Yeah.
about now.
Well, but that's the, we one of the things I talk about with my history students is once there is a certain level of civilization and wealth, then you have time for leisure activities. And one of those things, and I know we hate to think of it this way, but in a lot of ways, philosophy is a leisure activity because you have the
Yeah,
time to actually think and to actually consider things beyond just how am I going to put food from my hand to my mouth today.
yeah. Or you're not worrying about, okay, break down the gear,
Yeah.
grab the tent, get the animals, let's go
Yeah,
quickly.
exactly. But then, of course, that moves into arts and it moves into music and it moves into architecture and starting to think more about what's more artistically, aesthetically pleasing with this architecture rather than what's just going to be functional enough to get a roof over
Yeah,
my head to actually just keep the rain off.
yeah. You think
So,
about the casing stones of the Great Pyramid and how beautiful that must have looked
yeah,
in Giza. I
yeah.
mean, I
Or even when you start talking about the gardens in Babylon, it's like
yeah,
that's a leisure and that is a luxury item to be able to have. It's not a necessity necessarily, but you don't have the luxury of doing those sorts of things when you're on the move and you're being pushed out and you're just trying to keep people alive in the tribe and the people who are relying on you to keep you alive. So, yeah,
but focusing on that tribe. Well, I want to say one other quick thing that
yeah,
my
absolutely.
daughter noted the other day. You see this mountain range here?
Hmm.
It forms like an S.
Yeah,
People talk about Pangea. Well, my daughter figured out that the Earth probably folds in on itself because you look at that S and compare it to the S curve of the Nile, and they just kind of fit nice. If you were to fold the Earth, it's a joke, Dylan.
yeah.
It's,
I was my mind's having to look back and forth between both of
it
them. Oh, good grief.
is kind of interesting, though.
That is interesting. But
Not
yeah,
related to.
and that's another thing that is a little difficult for us. And this is something you and I have talked about before with scientific issues, scientific research and discovery, is that there is this presumption that things are the same as they've always been. And one of the things we have to deal with is the geography has changed
Oh
quite
yeah,
a bit over thousands and thousands of years.
yeah. And
So
then what
there
about
is,
pre-flood?
yeah, exactly. You're talking pre-flood geography because I mean, and I've talked about this before. And I say it over and over again. It wasn't really until the floods of Harvey happened in Houston that I had an all new respect for the power of flowing water and the sorts of things that we saw after that happened.
Or the tsunami in Fukushima?
Oh yeah, even more so. I would say the tsunami was. I mean, just to see the power of moving water is it's incredible. Um, and
Ooh,
so
it makes me
to say,
shudder right now thinking about it.
do what?
It makes me shudder right now just
Yeah,
thinking about
I remember how I mean it was shocking, man. Well, between that one and then what was the one? Was it 2012? Was that in Indonesia?
it. Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
my goodness, that one was so bad. The
it was awful,
tsunami over
man.
here.
Yeah, it was absolutely awful. But
Man.
again, you see those sorts of things, and then you think, okay, now let's back up and put this in the context of the flood judgment. Um, there's no telling what kind of geographical shifts you have after that, but all this. But I only say that just from the sense of the caveat with a lot of this is just understanding that geography has changed tremendously. The Sahara Desert didn't look quite as extreme desert at long ago. I mean, it's been desert for quite a while now, but or maybe one day we get to talk about Atlantis over on the west coast of Africa there. um yeah,
Atlantis?
yeah, Atlantis right there.
Yeah.
um yeah, that's super
That's what
sweet.
some people say.
I what's really interesting to me is if you back out a little bit from that, you can see the water flow down from there kind of pushes away into the Atlantic. So
Oh.
Yeah. So the whole thought is that this whole region was actually surrounded and inundated by water at one point, long, long time ago, and that supposedly Poseidon was one of the gods reigning over this particular city, and so it was a judgment to bring the city underwater, et cetera, et cetera. And
I
so,
mean, look how cool that is.
yeah, it's a massive, massive, and it follows the dimensions that are mentioned by ancient historians for Atlantis. So,
Yeah,
but
or
it's
when
really weird
Plato
because people expect it to be out in the middle of the ocean, but it's in there in the middle of the Sahara Desert. So
could be. I
could be,
mean, it's a good question.
yeah.
There's so many theories about it. Of
Oh
course,
yeah,
Plato was
absolutely,
writing about Solon being down there, and the
yeah,
Egyptians saying, "Oh, Solon, you Greeks always think you have a claim on ancient times. You don't know
yeah,
anything. There's not even an old man to be found among you."
yeah. Well, and it's hard too because even with older,
Because they had the first mover advantage in Egypt
yeah, exactly.
as compared to
Well,
Greece.
and it's hard too because you do have the occasional moments like you had with Herodotus in book 2 of his history. His Egyptian geography is terrible. It's just awful. It's got,
Did he go down there
I
to
don't know that he
Egypt?
ever made it down there or not. He may have, but man, his conception of the Nile was basically it goes south and then cuts directly west. Um, and you're talking if you go up from where your mouse is right now, probably there ish. He's got it cutting like straight to the west, like dead into the middle of the Sahara Desert. He does talk about this lake here that you're at, that whenever it gets
The
made.
Fayum Basin?
Uh huh. He talks about that construction because that's and correct me if I'm speaking out of turn here or if I've got this wrong, but my understanding is that whole thing's man made. That was a structure that was actually built by the ancient Egyptians in order to.
Yeah, you know what
So
the channel is that was cut here is called
no,
the Bar Yusuf,
okay, yeah, see,
which would
yeah, yeah,
which the people here anyway say that it was Joseph at the time that
mm,
Joseph was the vizier
gotcha,
of
yeah,
Egypt. And really, David Roll points out that the inundation of the Nile was severe and that the level was so high that it allowed Joseph had the idea to come and flood this area.
yeah.
And
Well, and
look
you can
how
see
pretty. It's like a flower, isn't
it
it?
is,
See
yeah, yeah. It's like a little
even
flower off the tree
clearer.
there. But what's interesting is that, and you see the result, it creates a massive amount of fertile ground there because, and
Yeah.
we talked about this again with my history students, um, the
This
Egyptians
could
used to
be
call the
anywhere
desert,
in the farmland
yeah,
of America.
yeah. And the Egyptians used to call and they may still to this day, but they call the desert area the red land, and then the land there around the Nile they call the black lands. But because see, it's exactly, exactly. Um, but they call that fertile land, they call it the black land because the river would flood, and then when it would recede, it'd leave all that black silt there that was
Yeah,
material to work with. But you see the same thing that happens
absolutely.
there in that reservoir. But yeah, he does talk about that in his history. But again, his geography for once you go south, his geography for Egypt is just abysmal.
Well, the poor guy couldn't go everywhere,
You
but
can't, and that's what's hard is these. Travel and don't get me wrong. I'm always amazed to look at ancient maps,
oh yeah.
considering that these guys aren't going up in orbit and looking down. They're just going off of horizontal observations of the landscape. That's remarkable.
Yeah, there's something for a first mover to do down the road, cartography.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And they
There's
get
one thing we need a map maker. So,
yeah,
map maker, make me a map.
find me a map,
Map
map me a map.
place.
Yeah, go see
Oh,
Fiddler on the Roof if you've never
oh,
seen it. Great episode.
I'll yeah.
Helpful died while I was in
He
Israel.
did. He did. I didn't. I'll be honest with you. I didn't even know he was still alive.
Oh,
So
that's rude.
I know that's why I always
Did
feel
you
bad.
hear Topol died? I didn't even know he's alive. You
Gosh, I
kidding?
always feel bad whenever I get word that somebody's died, and I thought you'd been gone for 2 decades now. Good grief. So, but yeah,
Well,
uh,
let's wrap this around into
yeah.
a really important point to make here. Let me read this first verse. Now these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and sons were born to them after the flood. This table of nations with all these different names is the brotherhood of man.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless, and dude, the way I like to put it is, so you've got your family has a story, okay, and they wound up in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
Mine were of the Celtic stock, the Gauls, who the Gauls and the Celts are
Yeah.
also related.
Yeah.
And so the Celtic stock went here in Scotland, the Clan Little. Mine were up here for thousands of years. And then from Barnstaple, they went to Massachusetts, Virginia, the hills of Kentucky, separated by thousands of years from the stock of my wife, who also come from a Japhetic and Shem mixture of the Dravidian people of southern India. Her parents' family lived here for thousands of years, and she was the first one born here in America. And we have two beautiful children because we're all in the same family.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. It's such a great story. We're separated by all this tribal stuff and all this anger, and it's really sad everything going on in Israel and Palestine and all that's terrible.
Yeah.
But this is the brotherhood of man right here. This is where we all come from, and this is part of the beauty of this chapter. In like digging into the desert to find oil. This is a beautiful story about the brotherhood of man.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the thing that I think we don't appreciate a lot of times in our Western context, or at least modern Western context, because obviously this hasn't always been a thing in the West. But you get people who always joke about they'll start their year-long Bible study program and they either get bogged down in Genesis 5 or Genesis 10, or later on with who's it? I think Ishmael's family line, Esau's family line, et cetera. Or if it's not that, it's going to be getting into numbers, and if they've made it so far as Chronicles, they're toast, because then you get 7 chapters of genealogy. But I don't think we appreciate why genealogies are so important. There is the caution in the New Testament over endless searching through genealogies, but that is not to say that genealogies are not important. If they weren't important, they wouldn't be included in the Word of God. And so we have to understand. Something I said many, many years ago was that God does not waste ink. There's no reason to put excess words on the page if it's not there for a purpose. And so as we look at these genealogies, especially like this one, I think we can easily just gloss over this and say, okay, well, it's just a bunch of names. This lines out and tells us where everybody came from, which ultimately gives me a lot of information to use on Jeopardy or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But in reality, what it really starts to speak to is that the Lord, though he is, you see between chapter 10, 11, and 12, he's moving toward this issue of establishing a line through which he will bring redemption to mankind. But what we often fail to see, I think, once we get there, is that he hasn't forgotten all these other peoples. He wants us to know that those peoples are there.
Yes.
And the reason he's choosing this guy, this house of Abraham, to move down through to come to his Redeemer is so that all those who have been dispersed throughout the nations would be. In fact, when we get into chapter 12, one of the first things he says, chapter 12, 1-3, if you can go there.
Genesis?
Yeah, Genesis 12.
Genesis 12, 1-3. Yeah,
so, he says specifically in verse, let me go down through here. Yeah, verse 3. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And you see Paul pull this theme out later on in his letters, where he talks about this. And so, even though it's fascinating to me that you're coming right off of chapter 10 and chapter 11, and then within 3 verses, you get this comment of all these families that we just talked about in chapter 10 and 11. These are the families of the peoples that will be blessed.
Beautiful,
because of what's coming through you. And so, again, I'm always cautious with people. Like when you hit these genealogies, you've got to realize there's a reason why they're in there. And yeah, there's certainly the level you can get of the endless speculation. And I think, like, if I sat here and waxed eloquent about the genealogies of my family from Scandinavia through potentially through the histories in Troy and back through to Mesopotamia, like the point I'm trying to make at that point is look how awesome my family is and look at the pride we have. But that's not the point.
Hey, I want to know what did your family do to my family?
Your family, I think, made us a lot of money.
Oh, thanks a lot. That's
Yeah.
great. Thanks a lot.
Look, we knew where to go to make the money is what that basically boils down to. That's kind of, to me, that's kind of the story of the Scandinavian people is we get where we're going, and mostly we found mountains, um, which was all well and good, and we
Oh,
farmed.
wait, no, that's not true. You forgot about all the fjords,
Oh yeah, we got all the fjords. Yeah, there's plenty of
mountains and
fishing to be
fjords.
had. Yeah, ironically, I don't know where I was reading this recently in a history of Scandinavia, but they talked about how
Ooh,
interestingly, I mean, yes, they absolutely did eat a lot of fish and stuff, but they had a lot of farming and livestock stuff that they ate as well. So, but I mean, this is one of the reasons why the second largest group of immigrants to
let
the
us see
United
the
States.
farmland.
Yeah, it's there, but that's the
Well,
hard part.
there's got to be some somewhere.
Yeah. Well, that was the hard part is
This is a hard land.
it
No
is. It's
wonder
absolutely
not many people displacing you. I mean,
yeah. Well, and don't get me wrong, I think the Swedes have it a little better.
here we go. I found
than-
it.
There you go. There you go. But no, the Norwegians were the second largest group of immigrants to the
Or was
United
that
States back
Sweden?
in the
Oh no, I was in
1800s.
Sweden.
Okay, there you go. But yeah, with the land grant act that happened in 1862 here in the states, you get a ton of Irish people. Obviously, I think they're the largest group of immigrants that come over.
Irish need not apply.
Yeah, but then the Norwegians were, but specifically Norwegian, not necessarily Scandinavian, generally because you've run out of farmland in Scandinavia. There's just it's so mountainous and all the fjords cutting through there. There's just you got to go somewhere, and so you had a ton of Norwegians coming in. But yeah,
Sweden's
Sweden,
got a much better land.
yeah, that's the land of the
Why don't
Svea's.
you go bother the Swedes?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is they all knew how to defend themselves for sure, and they raided each other by all means. The Danes and the Svears and the Nords. They all fought with each other for sure. But at
Look
some
at
point,
Denmark.
you're thinking surely there's somewhere we could go elsewhere to raid and make some money. So,
Look how
but to
pretty
be
and
fair, they
orderly.
also, I mean, they were raiding all over Northern Europe and into Britain and the Celtic peoples. I mean, they were all over the place,
Thank you
the
for that.
Baltic. And yeah, I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't. They see series like the Vikings and other things like that, and they think basically the Scandinavians were just focused on Anglo-Saxon Britain, but they were all over the place. I mean, in fact, one of the interesting stories, the Varangians were a group of people that were basically mercenaries that went and worked as a guard for the emperor in Constantinople. So that was really far removed. The other story I really like is that the Slavs actually hired a Scandinavian named Rurik to come and be their king. And so the first king of Russia was actually a Viking. Um, and so the dynasty of the Rurids, the first dynasty in Russia, was actually a Scandinavian Viking dynasty. So, but anyway,
What a what a fish story.
isn't it? Isn't it?
I'm kidding.
Yeah. But
Actually,
but but
everyone
that
in China is related to the Scandinavians.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing I think you point out even with your own personal story is you get the dispersals, but you even see over the course of the last, I'd say 1,000, 2,000 years, and now you're starting to see sort of that explosion outward, but then that collapse back inward of these peoples coming back together and mingling and mixing together. And it all starts at a little bitty tower in the middle of nowhere.
That was awesome.
But
Man, That's a great ending, unless you got something else to say.
No, but yeah, like I said, I think really the big thing for me is just for people to realize, look, these, and I'm not saying all genealogies have this meaning, but I've said many times the genealogy in chapter 5 of Genesis, that's more about demonstrating the passing on of the curse of sin generation after generation. It didn't stop with the first man and woman. You get to this genealogy, and the point is moving into the comment made from Abraham that all these peoples that we just talked about, these are the peoples of the lands that will be blessed because of what's coming through your family line. So I think my thing was, we talked a lot about genealogies and peoples today and things like that. And I think just the encouragement that as you're going through the scriptures, that you just understand that, look, these genealogies have a reason that they are in scripture, and we need to take that very seriously and realize that there's impact to be had there for those explanations. And so, like you said at the outset, this digging in and trying to get beneath the surface of what's going on in the text when they do come to those genealogies, you can't just gloss over them, but try to figure out contextually, why does this genealogy matter at this point in this text? Because the Lord is trying to say something to us through these genealogical records. So
Yes.
but anyway,
And it's an amazing story. It's a spiritual story. It's intellectual,
yep. And
geographical.
yeah, spatial. So it's very spatial and special.
You're so spatial.
You're so spatial.
Did you say spatial or special?
Yeah. Oh wow, can you go to the other planets on this map?
Yeah,
Wow, that's fun.
you sure can.
Yeah. Wow. The big blue.
Oh no, the labels are back
Oh,
on.
the labels are back.
Oh no,
Oh
the whole
no.
thing's destroyed.
There you go. Well, all right. Well, I think that about does us for our fourth round of ponderings. So, but we hope that you will be able to join us next time, and we appreciate those of you who've been patiently waiting for new episodes of this to come out. But thank you all for joining us, and we will see y'all next time.
See you next time. God bless you.